G'day, welcome to Bradley's Bakehouse, where today we're going to find out that it's not easy being green with a matcha marbled milk loaf. I got the idea for this recipe from a friend who asked if I'd ever put matcha into like a bread or anything like that, and I must have thought it was a pretty good idea. This is a really impressive looking but really quite easy recipe. We're going to use the same milk bread formula that we used last week in the episode Ready for More, but we're going to break some of the dough off, backmix some matcha powder through it, put a beautiful marble spiral through it, and everyone's going to think that you are amazing, even though it's actually really simple. So let's crack on. So for ingredients, it's the exact same formula as last week's milk loaf recipe. So we've got bread flour, we've got instant yeast, no active dry nonsense, just go instant, you'll be happier for it. Got bread improver, got full cream milk powder, salt, sugar, a little bit of butter, got some cold water because I live in Queensland and it's really hot here. If you live in a colder climate, you might need warm room temperature water. And the star of today's show, which is our matcha powder. Matcha is very in right now. It's very much like a matcha latte is like the very in thing. At least in Australia it is. Like I can feel the matcha queens, like I can hear them salivating over this one. Okay, so straight out of the gate, not doing anything new here. The first thing that we need to do is get our fermentolyse going. So in goes our flour, our improver, all of it, please, our yeast, and our water. And then with the paddle attachment, we're just gonna mix that on the slowest speed till it's like a single shaggy mass. Then we're gonna lift it up, cover the bowl with a plate, and leave it for 20 minutes for the chemical sort of process of fermentolyse to start establishing our gluten matrix. If you wanna know more about any of this stuff, I elaborate on this on just about every bread making video. Check out Ready for Anything. That's like the first video that I made on this channel. I go into a little bit more detail there if you wanna know how this works. All you need to know, mix it into a shaggy mass, cover it, let it rest for 20 minutes, and give the gluten development like a really good head start. Okay, so 15, 20 minutes or so has passed. We've got some like good gluten getting developed in our dough here, our milk bread. We're gonna add the rest of the ingredients apart from the matcha now. So in goes the sugar, the milk powder, the salt, and the butter. So with our dough hook attached, we're gonna mix this on its slower speed until everything's kind of combined, and then we're gonna turn it up to kind of like a medium-y sort of speed, and we're gonna spin it for about 8 minutes worth of kneading. Okay, so that's about 8 minutes of like pretty hard kneading. Our dough has picked up some nice elasticity, it's nice and smooth. Very easy to handle this dough. I say that in the milk bread video that this dough is a great dough for beginners because it's just so easy to handle. Now, because we're marbling this dough and because I can't be bothered to make two separate doughs, we need to split this so we can back mix our matcha powder into the smaller portion of the dough that's gonna go on the inside. So the total of this dough should be around, 405. I was aiming for 400, so I'm pretty happy with that. So I want about 30% of this to be matcha-fied, so I'm probably gonna, 130. So this is just gonna get set aside. It'll get bulk fermented at the same time because this batch mixing is not gonna take a super long time. So I'm just gonna leave that there for the time being. This, however, is going back into our mixer, and we're going to slowly introduce our matcha powder while it's mixing. If we dump it all in there at once, it's gonna be too dry for the hook to really grab anything, so we're gonna introduce it a little by little. And this is a pretty small percentage of matcha, but matcha is also like quite potent, so you don't really need a whole lot. All right, cool, I'm pretty happy with that. So we're gonna let these bulk ferment now for about 40 minutes until they're about double in size. And then we're gonna punch them down, rest them, and then shape our loaf. What I'm gonna do, this loaf here that's matcha-fied, I'm gonna let it bulk ferment in this because the certain amount of moisture that sort of escapes to the edges of the skin, that's actually gonna pick up a little bit more of the stuff from around the bowl. It kind of just helps with the cleaning. The plain white dough, just gonna get thrown in here. And I'm gonna cover this with a plate so it doesn't dry out. And we will check back in 40 minutes. All right, so it's been about 40 minutes. Our dough has risen really beautifully, and we're gonna degas it and get it resting before we shape it. Because we wanna keep these colors nice and separate, we're gonna do everything that we have to do with the white. So that's a nice degas there, squeeze all that air out of it, get it onto the bench, get it booled up. We're gonna do everything that we have to do with the white first, and then we're gonna touch the green, right? So the green's nice and done. Those colors are gonna evenly disperse a little bit more through the various stages of fermentation. Like this is significantly more even than it was before. That being said, it's also getting baked into a loaf of bread. So we really want this for the swirl. These two are just gonna rest for about 10 minutes or so before we roll them out and shape our loaf. This is a really good time to preheat the oven. So I'm preheating my oven to 220 degrees, and I've also got a cast iron skillet in the bottom because we're gonna perform a steam injection on this one. We're gonna bake this pretty similarly to how you would just bake like a white Vienna. 10 minutes later, our dough is now rested. It's ready to get rolled out. Now, one thing that I am gonna do a little bit differently this time is I'm going to use a rolling pin. Because we're doing a marbled loaf, I don't just want like one big chunk of green, I want there to be like a nice swirl all through it. So that means kind of rolling this out a little bit thinner than we normally would and kind of almost making like a scroll. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna flatten this out as much as I can with my hand. Get that air out of there. Then I'm just gonna make sure it's not sticking. Keep in mind, I'm not using any flour for this. The dough is only 60% hydration. It shouldn't be that sticky. And then I'm gonna roll this out to a nice like square rectangle sort of shape. Square rectangle, a rectangle. It's one or the other. It can't be both. I think that's like a pretty empirical difference. So satisfying hearing the air leave the dough. Just pick her up occasionally and just sort of like make sure it's not super stuck to the bench. It might take a little bit of effort to pull off, but it should pull off cleanly. See? Like it's sticking, but it's not sticking, you know? Just that one to the side. And we're gonna do the same thing on this. And keep in mind, we're doing the green one after because we don't want to contaminate our pin or anything. We want the green to stay separate as it can. And you see when you flatten that out, that's really quite green. Like there's a lot of color in that. We've got to think about how we got to fit that inside, right? Because we remember, we want that nice swirl, so we need it to be pretty even. So if you lay that across there like that, that's pretty good, but there's a little bit at the top and the bottom that I think could just be a little bit more even, you know? Ooh, get that back up there. So we're just gonna roll that out just a little bit thinner. Really struggling, flip it over and give it a roll. For some reason that works. I can't tell you why, but for some reason it does. Like we're basically making a scroll. This is basically a scroll that you're not gonna cut, just with two separate doughs, really. I reckon that's gonna be pretty good. Just sort of stretch it out, make sure it's nice and even, and give it just a little bit of a press. And that's just to get it to adhere, right? So we can like manipulate it and not worry about something slipping or something bunching up. So give that just the tiniest little going over with a rolling pin, just the tiniest dough, very little pressure. We're just getting it properly even. And then we're just gonna make sure it's not sticking one final time. And now, shaping this, just pretend you're not marbling anything. Just pretend you're not doing anything fancy and just shape it like you would shape anything else. So pull the top out, push it down, nice tight seam, and then pull up and then roll towards you. Use those thumbs to keep the dough nice and tensioned. Roll it towards you, stretching it a little bit, making sure that top stays nice and clean. Probably taper those edges a little bit more. That's just me being lazy. Make sure one side's not bigger than the other. Boom. And then, if you want to get rid of these little end bits, fold them underneath like that. Flip it over, roll her out again. One last time, roll her out again. There we go. Just like shaping a long roll, just like shaping a Vienna, just forget you're doing anything fancy. You can pinch off those edges if you want. Give it the little blade of the hand just to make sure she's nice and even. There you go. This is just a sheet pan with some parchment paper on it. Make sure you know where the seam is. You can flip it over and pinch the seam if you really want to. There we go. There we are. This is an instant bread, so we're probably gonna let this proof for probably about 40 minutes, I would say. Oven should be preheating, oven should be well on the way to being hot. Cast iron skillet in there should be ready for our steam injection. One thing that I am gonna do, because it's quite warm today before I set it aside to proof, just gonna spritz it with a little water. Just to stop the dough from drying out. And I'll see you in half an hour. Okay, so it's been about 35-ish minutes and we are ready to score our beautiful loaf. It's proofed up really nicely. It's passing the poke test beautifully. When I say the poke test, I mean if you poke it, it springs back slowly, but it does leave a tiny little indent. Basically means that the bread is ready to go in the oven. The bread is still gonna spring, the yeast has still got a bit of energy, but it's developed a lot of really great flavor and it's developed a really great shape. So one thing that we need to do before we bake this is we need to score it. Now, I'll run through this really quickly, but basically we score bread to create an artificial weak point so that when the bread rises, it doesn't break out the weakest part. We're creating a weakest part to channel the oven spring in a certain direction. Now with this kind of loaf, I've made this loaf a couple times, and what I really like is a bunch of really quite short, thin, diagonal cuts across it. I think I want to get some of that green out there. I want a nice visual indicator that there's something a little bit special going on with this loaf. So I'm gonna start in this corner here. 1, ooh, that's beautiful. 2, 3, 4, let the razor do the work. 5, 6, 7. Someone always told me that you have to score bread with an odd number. Like, it's super traditional to score bread with an odd number. I don't know if that's like canon. I don't know if that's like a thing, but I now instinctively will do 3, 5, or 7. Someone's broken me if that's not a real thing. Someone said something in my ear ages ago and I just have never been able to like shake it. Now, another thing we're gonna do, so we prepared our oven for steam injection. We've got that cast iron skillet at the bottom. We've done this a bunch of times on this channel as well, but just to run you through what we're gonna do really quickly. We're gonna load our product in, we're gonna cover our oven door with a tea towel, and then we're gonna pour about a cup of boiling water into that cast iron skillet to flood the baking chamber with steam. That's gonna keep the skin of the dough nice and gelatinous so it can spring to its fullest potential. It's also gonna give us like a nice shine and like a thinner, more like shattery sort of crust. Now that's probably gonna bake for about 25 minutes all up. About 12 minutes in, I'm gonna rotate it so it cooks nice and evenly, and because I really wanna emphasize that shine, I'm also gonna spritz it with some more water. It's just gonna give it more of a lustrous sort of look. It's purely aesthetic, that one. Okay, so it's probably been a little bit closer to half an hour, but my oven's really terrible, so I had to drop the temperature low and like rotate it a bunch. Have a look at that. Hey? Look at that boy, isn't that handsome? Ooh, oh, it smells like green tea in a bakery. This probably took a little bit closer to half an hour to bake, but I also had to drop my temperature down to like 180 degrees and just like rotate it a bunch to get it to brown evenly. My oven's fucking terrible. Do you have any idea the lengths that I have to fucking go to get stuff that's like this evenly cooked out of this fucking piece of shit oven? It's a fucking nightmare. I had to sit the baby in, the shuffling, the fucking with the temperatures, the two third-party thermometers that I have shoved in there to try and get an even temperature reading. It's fucking bullshit. That probably got a little bit out of hand, didn't it? I should probably cut some of that out. That smells incredible. Now, we do need to wait for this to fully cool before we slice into it, yada, yada, yada. If you're not new here, you know the drill. Very happy with that, hey? Ooh, lovely bottom. Nice hollow thump on the bottom. This is very light. This is very like light and airy, and it just, it's a beautiful little like, oh, I just threw this together earlier, loaf that you can just put out and everyone can have such a delicious time. Lovely. See you in an hour when this is fully cooled and I'll show you how sick that marble's gonna be. All right, so a couple hours have passed. We're ready to cut into this now. Check out the marble cross section, which is all very nice. Are we ready? Oh my God. Holy fuck, that's a good one. Jesus. God damn, that's the tightest swirl I've ever had. My God. Oh shit, we gotta take photos of that. Hang on, we'll get to this in a minute. I gotta take photos of that. Okay, sorry, we're back. I just needed to take photos of that spiral because that's the nicest one I've ever had. All right, let's start from the edge. Got some more slices. Ooh, you see the start, like the green start coming in. In a really weird, quite pretentious way, like it almost sort of tells a story. Like as the spiral starts coming in, like it's almost like a narrative, you know? No? No one gets that? Okay. All right, fuck you guys. I'm gonna eat a piece. Here you go. Because the dough already has like a little bit of sweetness to it, you kind of just get like a little bit of that like really warming, kind of like comforting matcha-y sort of flavor. And I think it's like just enough. I think if it was just any more matcha-y, it would just bowl you over and kind of numb your taste buds a bit. But I think the right mix of like the Shokopani sort of style milk bread with, you know, the kind of depth and like a little bit of bitterness that comes from the matcha, I think it's just a really nice balance of flavors. And I think you could just like smash this over like a cup of coffee or like a tea or something. Just like lightly butter it and you just have such a good time. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Bradley's Bakehouse. I certainly hope that you got something from this. This dough is really forgiving, and if you wanted to get into doing the kind of more aesthetically interesting stuff like marbling, this would be a really, really good place to start. Marbling is often done with rye. There'll be a light and a dark rye marbled together. I know I've certainly made that a lot before in the past. I learned how to do that at TAFE even, so that's like a pretty industry sort of standard bread. But I think something like this, something that's like the sweet, kind of Shokopan-esque dough with like the nice matcha inside. I think it's a really great kind of almost show-stopping sort of piece to bring to like a party or a gathering or something like that. And I think even from the outside, like I love the visual indicator. I love the stripes of the green down the sides. I like when you can look at something and you can tell what's in it. I think this would be a really good place to start. I think building upon last week's milk bread recipe, I think this is just kind of like another thing to have in your little repertoire. And I think anybody who loved matcha definitely would go a little bit bonkers over this, I think. Because people don't just like matcha, they really, really like matcha. Thank you again so much for watching. Subscribe if that's a thing that you feel like doing. We've got some really cool stuff coming up, and have a good day.